Good afternoon. My name is Jason Butts. I'm a Lieutenant Paramedic with the Castle Rock Fire and Rescue Department, and I have my crew behind me who's going to be assisting me today. We're going to be talking about lifting and moving. Lifting and moving is a very physical skill. Some of the things that we need to remember is that we need to have a high fitness level as well as a high training level to perform lifting and moving. We'll talk a little bit about the body mechanics of lifting and moving. Some of those are making sure that we do the most important thing, which is protecting our back. And to protect our back, we want to use the bigger muscles in our body, especially the muscles in our legs, for providing lifting and moving. And the thing that we want to remember in the non-emergent scenario is that we want to provide as many providers to help move our patients as are needed, and also provide the proper equipment that we may need to move our patients safely. A couple of the things back to body mechanics that we want to also consider is we want to make sure that the areas that we're working in are nice and stable, so we want to make sure that the ground that our feet are on top of is stable and won't move out of our way and cause us to lose control of our patient, and will keep our body as safe as possible. We also want to make sure that we keep our feet about shoulder distance apart. That will keep our stability and center of gravity. Some of the other things that we want to consider is making sure that our back is nice and straight when we do the lift, so that we are not using our back muscles to lift the patient or the equipment that we may be using. And the other most important thing, and you guys will see it here in just a second, is communication. You want to communicate with the people that you're working with and make sure that they are on the same page as you are when you decide to lift and move your patients. At this time, we'll show some of those specific safety precautions on an actual patient lift. These guys, Matt here and Joe, have made sure that their ground is nice and stable and that they're not going to have any be in a slippery position, or the ground's not going to come out from underneath them and cause them to lose control of their patient or their bodies. The next thing they're going to do from here is they're going to communicate exactly what they're going to do with each other to make this lift of this patient happen at this time.
Matt, are you ready to lift?
Ready.
Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3.
As you can see, Joe bent down nice and low. He kept his back nice and straight. He used his leg muscles to lift his side, as well as what Matt did over here. They communicated with each other and told each other exactly when they were going to lift and how they were going to perform the lift. This time they're going to just do the lift in reverse, so you can see the patient going to the ground, and they'll communicate that to us as well.
All right, Matt, you ready to go down?
Ready.
Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3.
And that was just in reverse. You can see that Joe kept his back nice and straight. He used the big muscles in his body, his leg muscles, as well as his arm muscles to hold the backboard up with the patient on it. And then they were able to get the board onto the ground safely with the patient safely, and they both did it so that their bodies were in a safe position to perform the lifting and moving. At this time, we're going to discuss proper lifting and moving of the stretcher. This is an ambulance stretcher, an ambulance cot. One of the most important things to note when you're working with your stretcher is to follow the proper manufacturer recommendations. Use the literature and the training that they provide for their device, and it will help you in learning the proper lifting and techniques for that specific piece of equipment. Matt and Joe are going to show us the actual proper lifting of this stretcher here. Once again, they want to make sure that they use proper lifting techniques, and those lifting techniques would making sure that they have their feet shoulder width apart to help maintain their balance. They want to make sure that they're lifting with their legs and not with their back. And most importantly, they want to communicate with each other. They also want to check their scene to make sure there's nothing in the scene that would cause them to lose control of their patient and or possibly injure themselves or their patient. So at this time, Matt and Joe will show us a safe lift of the stretcher here.
Okay, Matt, you ready to go all the way up?
Ready.
On 3, 1, 2, 3.
As you can see, they use those proper techniques. They checked their surface to make sure that their surface was nice and safe. They kept their legs shoulder width apart to maintain their balance. They used their legs instead of their back to do the lift of the stretcher, and they communicated with each other so that they could move in one fluid motion. One of the things that you want to consider when working with a stretcher, once again to follow your manufacturer recommendation, is that you may need more than 2 providers to actually lift and move your stretcher properly when you're lifting and moving heavier patients. At this time, we're going to talk about proper techniques for maneuvering up and down the stairs. Some of the important aspects of moving up and down stairs is to use the proper equipment for transferring patients up and down stairs, and also to use as many personnel as you can to help assist you down those stairs. One important thing to also remember is to have somebody backing you up as you're going downstairs, especially if you're going down lots of stairs or stairs that are very steep. They will help to guide you down the stairs and let you know where your footing is as you go down those stairs, especially if you're operating backwards, as Joe is going to be in a second. For this scenario, we're going to go down these 2 stairs here with John on our stair chair, and we're going to try to do that. We're going to do that in a safe manner so that we get John safely to the bottom of these 2 stairs. So the first thing we're going to do is have Joe come in and extend the arms of the stair chair. We're going to communicate with each other. I'm going to tell Joe that we're going to go down. Joe, we're going to go down these 2 stairs here, and this stair that you're on is about a 2-foot tread, and then you will step off. And once we get to the bottom of the stairs, we'll go ahead and stop. On 3, 1, 2, 3, move.
I made my step.
I'm down. And I'm down off the last one. Once you reach the bottom of your stairs, you can move your stair chair to your awaiting wheeled stretcher and transfer your patient over so that they may be transported to an awaiting medical facility. As emergency providers, there will be times where we need to shuttle our equipment from our apparatus to the patient's side, maybe in their home or on the scene of an accident. To do that, we also need to use proper lifting and techniques of our equipment so that we don't hurt ourselves getting it to the patient's side. Some of the things that we do need to remember is that we want to make sure that we understand our equipment and we understand where its center of gravity is and how it's going to react when we lift it up. We want to understand how heavy it is and how it's going to function once we lift it to move it from one place to another. Some important things to keep in mind are keeping ourselves on a solid surface, using our legs and not our back to lift, keeping our legs shoulder width apart to provide the lift, and then lifting the equipment with our large muscles in our legs and not the muscles in our back. At this time, Joe's going to show us the safest way to pick up this bag here. He's going to bend down on a nice solid surface. He's going to use his legs and not his back to pick up the bag. When he arrives on the scene, he can do just the opposite by bending down and using his legs and keeping his back nice and straight and placing the bag onto the ground. So this time we're going to talk about 3 different lifting and moving techniques. We're going to talk about log rolling our patients, and we're going to talk about the safe operation of that. We're going to talk about reaching, and this will apply to any of the lifting and moving techniques that we do. And then the last thing that we're going to discuss is pushing and pulling, and we're going to simulate a emergent situation where the patient has to be moved out of the area, and we're going to use a push and pull technique to actually push and pull the patient out of an area of immediate life threat. Matt and Joe at this time are going to lean down next to their patient that they're going to log roll, and they're going to be nice and close to the patient so that they keep good body mechanics and that they're not reaching out too far to actually log roll the patient up. At this time, they'll go ahead and communicate and walk us through a log roll.
Okay, are you ready to log roll him, Matt?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Once again, they want to communicate as they do this.
On 3, 1, 2, 3.
As you can see, the patient was nice and close to them and they didn't have to reach out very far. They've also kept their equipment, which is the blanket in this scenario, very close to where they're doing their operation so that they don't have to A, let go of the patient, or B, reach out too far and compromise their back and potential injury to their back or other parts of their body or their patient. They've placed the blanket underneath the patient, and keeping those same techniques in mind, they're going to log roll the patient back onto the blanket.
All right, let's go back down, Matt. You ready? Ready. On 3, 1, 2, 3.
So they kept the patient nice and close to them. They were able to log roll the patient back onto the ground and onto the blanket. And at this time, they're going to go ahead and package the patient into the blanket. From this point, if this was an emergency situation, they need to move the patient emergently out of an area of immediate danger. They may use a pushing and pulling technique. For the blanket here, Joe's going to actually do the pulling, while Matt provides a push technique from the back to give Joe extra support as they move the patient out of the area.
Okay, Matt, we're going to move. Are you ready?
Ready.
Ready, go. Ready, go.
As you can see, they're staying nice and low to the
Ready,
ground.
go.
They're keeping their backs nice and safe, and they're using their leg muscles to help them move the patient. So this time we want to talk about some general considerations and rationale for lifting and moving the patients. The first thing we want to address is the immediate life threat. Sometimes when we may need to move our patients with whatever means possible, with whatever techniques that we can recall at the time, might be important for getting our patients out of a life-threatening situations. And some of those situations may be if the patient is involved in some type of a fire and they need to be moved immediately. They may be in some type of an explosive environment and you need to remove them from that environment as well. Another on-scene hazard, such as an electrically charged line, or they're in a pond of water of some sort and you need to remove them from that. Another thing that you should consider is if you have to perform some type of a life-saving technique on a patient, that would be another immediate life threat, and you would use any technique that you had available to remove the patient to provide that care as well. At this time, we're going to discuss the 3 emergency moves or 3 emergency techniques for moving patients. And those 3 emergency moves are going to be the blanket drag. We're also going to be picking the patient up underneath their armpits and moving them that way. And then the last one that we'll discuss is the clothing drag. The first one that Joe's going to do is the blanket drag. This is very similar to what we discussed earlier. Joe wants to keep the patient nice and close to him, keep his equipment very close to him as well. That way he protects himself and is able to perform the procedure very quickly. He's going to pull the blanket underneath the patient and package the patient as quickly as possible. Once again, this is an emergency move, so he doesn't need to make it pretty, he just needs to make it effective so that he can move the patient. The patient is in a position now to where Joe can use the blanket and actually pull the patient to safety or out of harm's way. From this point, Joe can go on to the second emergency drag, where he's going to come behind the patient, lift him up by the shoulders, place his arms underneath the patient's armpits, and then as you see, Joe has grabbed the patient's forearm so that he can maintain control of the patient. He has the patient very close to him, and he's going to use his legs to help lift the patient from the ground and up into the air so that the patient can be dragged to safety and out of the emergency or life-threatening situation. Another technique that Joe can use is to stay low if he needs to, if the patient is a heavy patient or he feels like he can't get the patient up very easily. The last emergency drag that Joe is going to do is the clothing drag. Joe's going to gather up the clothing around the patient's neck, and he will get a good grasp of the patient's clothing, and he will use the patient's clothing to help assist him in dragging the patient out of the immediate life threat area. Once again, he's going to stay nice and low, or he may come up high as long as he's protecting his back and using his leg muscles to move the patient out of the area of life threat. This is the ambulance stretcher or ambulance cot. It's a wheeled ambulance stretcher, and it is used once you're able to place your patient onto the stretcher. You can wheel the patient around, and the stretcher also articulates up and down so that you can bring the stretcher down to the patient and then lift it up with really as many providers as you need to safely do that and wheel the patient to an awaiting ambulance. It also is placed into the ambulance and locks into place so that you can transport the patient while they were on the stretcher and then provide care in the back of the ambulance without having to move the patient. And then when you arrive at a medical facility, to remove the patient while they stay on the stretcher and wheel them into a medical facility to receive further care. This is a scoop stretcher, and the scoop stretcher can be used to remove patients who are lying on the ground if you want to actually scoop them up from the ground, or it can also be brought into environments that are tight or have limited access, and you can actually break the board apart and place the board underneath the patient and then lock it together so that you can remove the patient to an awaiting stretcher. This is a backboard or a long spine board. It has multiple applications. Can be used to place underneath a patient and remove the patient to areas where you have an awaiting stretcher or an ambulance, or to an area where you can provide care. It is also used to help stabilize patients with neck and back injuries. And the Stokes basket can be used in an outside environment or an inside environment where you need the patient packaged inside and securely fastened. It can be used with the long spine board or without, and it will assist you when you have multiple providers to help remove patients from areas to an awaiting ambulance, stretcher, or an area where you can provide care. It can also be used in areas where rope rescue is needed. And a third way that it can be used is to mount a tire device onto the bottom to assist you in removing the patient in an easier fashion, letting the tire help you to maneuver terrain and through obstacles to get your patient out of harm's way. This is a flexible stretcher, and the flexible stretcher can be used in different applications where you may have a patient who's in a tight or confined space that doesn't have a back injury or a neck injury. This can also be used for your larger patients when you're using multiple providers. It has handles that are sewn throughout the device on the sides, on the front, and on the back of it that help providers grasp multiple areas and provide positions for multiple providers to help move patients to areas where an awaiting ambulance, stretcher, or an area of refuge is for providing patient care. This is the stair chair, and the stair chair is used for patients who are able to sit up on their own, who may need to be moved from upper levels or lower levels up and down stairs to an awaiting stretcher. The last device that you may run across is a portable stretcher. This device can be used to maneuver patients who need to be moved from one area to another, for example, from a home to a waiting wheeled stretcher outside. The patient can be secured to the portable stretcher and then moved to the area of need. The first device that we're going to go over is the wheeled stretcher. Matt and Joe are going to use proper lifting techniques, and they're going to lift the patient up. They're also going to communicate like we've discussed and lift the patient onto the wheeled stretcher.
Okay, Matt, are you ready to lift? On 3, 1, 2, 3.
As you can see, they communicated what they were going to do. They lifted in a nice, smooth fashion. And then they placed the patient onto the stretcher while maintaining the safety of themselves and also the patient. At this time, they're going to secure the patient to the wheeled stretcher. Once the patient is secure in the wheeled stretcher, then they're going to work as a team and communicate with each other in lifting the wheeled stretcher and then also placing the wheeled stretcher into the ambulance.
Okay, Matt, you ready to go up? 1, 2, 3.
Once again, we see good lifting techniques here. They've planted their feet, used a good shoulder width on their feet. They've kept their backs nice and straight and lifted with their legs. At this time, they're going to lift the wheeled stretcher into the ambulance. They worked again as partners and communicated. They were able to raise the legs on the device in a nice, safe fashion and then place the wheeled stretcher into the ambulance so the patient can be transported. At this time, we're going to go over the skill using the scoop stretcher or the breakaway stretcher. And we want to use the same principles for good lifting and moving of this patient as we've discussed so far. The first thing that Matt and Joe are going to do is they're going to come to their scoop stretcher device and they're going to break the device apart. Once they have the device apart, they'll be able to place the device on either side of the patient. From this point, they'll maneuver the scoop stretcher underneath of the patient in a manner that is scooping the patient up. They will, once they have the scoop stretcher pieces maneuvered under the patient, they will be able to connect the device back together. This may require them to actually lift part of the patient up. Once again, they want to use good lifting techniques, watching their neck or watching their back. This would be used on a patient that does not have a neck or a back injury. Once they have the scoop stretcher device placed back together and intact and make sure it's secured, then they will secure the patient to the scoop stretcher so that they may move the scoop stretcher with the patient to the awaiting wheeled stretcher.
All right, Matt, are you ready to lift?
From this point, they're going to use their
three,
good lifting
1,
techniques.
2, 3.
Made sure they were on solid ground. Their feet were about shoulder width apart. They communicated with each other. They lifted with their legs and not their back. And once again, we're going to secure the patient to the stretcher. And then once they have the patient secured to the stretcher, they will lift the stretcher into the loading position and then load the patient into the ambulance. In this skill, we're going to place the patient on a long spine board. We will simulate that this patient does have a neck or a back injury. So I will assist the providers as a third provider in providing a safe moving operation of this patient. The first thing that we've done is we've placed a C-collar on this patient. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to log roll this patient. Once again, we want to use good, safe lifting and moving techniques, which we'll talk about as we load the patient onto the long spine board. The first thing that we're going to do is Matt and I are going to position ourselves so that we can log roll the patient.
Are you guys ready to roll?
Joe's going to call out the commands for us.
Towards you guys on 3. 1, 2, 3.
We're going to protect our backs and also protect the patient. And at this time, Matt's going to go ahead and palpate the back and make sure that we don't have any complications back there. Matt and I have kept our equipment close here so that we can maneuver it right into the back of the patient to place the patient onto the long spine board. We'll roll it up to the patient, and then we'll let Joe call the move so that we can move the patient back down.
Okay, down on 3. 1, 2, 3. We're good, guys.
Good? Okay. Once we have the patient in the position that we want the patient on the long spine board, then we will use the securing device. In this instance, we're going to use what we call spider straps to secure the patient to the long board. Once we have secured the patient to the long board, we can go ahead and secure the patient's head to the long board as well so that we don't have movement of the head. And Matt and Joe will work on that in conjunction with each other. And then following your local protocols, you will provide the proper assessment for this type of a patient as you have place them on the spine board to protect their neck or their back.
All right, Matt, are you ready to lift?
From here, Matt and Joe will once again use the proper lifting techniques and move the patient on the spine board to the wheeled stretcher.
Up on 3. 1, 2, 3.
From this point, we're going to go ahead and secure the patient to the wheeled stretcher. So they use the securing devices on the wheeled stretcher and secure the patient. Once they have the patient secured to the wheeled stretcher, they'll raise the wheeled stretcher into a transporting position and then load the wheeled stretcher into the ambulance to transport the patient to the hospital. Okay, at this point we're going to use the Stokes basket or the basket stretcher. The patient has already been placed onto the long spine board, which we've already seen, and now we're going to place the patient into the Stokes basket for removal to an area where we have an awaiting ambulance or a stretcher or where we provide further care. So at this time the patient is going to be lifted into, on the backboard, on the long spine board, into the Stokes basket.
Are you ready?
Matt and Joe will use good lifting
On 3.
techniques.
1, 2, 3.
And move the patient over to the Stokes basket.
And down on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Once again, they're communicating very well with each other. Then they will secure the patient inside of the Stokes basket. Once the patient is secured inside of the Stokes basket, more providers will come in. We're going to use 4 providers, and we can maneuver this Stokes basket or the stretcher, the basket stretcher to where we need to. John will come in, and we will, once again, all 4 providers will use good lifting techniques. We will lift with our legs and not our back. We'll let Joe lead the communication on this.
Is everybody ready? Up on 3. 1, 2, 3.
From here, we can maneuver the patient wherever we need to. Once we get to an area to where we have the patient, that we're going to transfer the patient from the Stokes basket to our stretcher, then we can put the patient down, and Joe will lead us in that.
All right, everybody down. On 3. 1, 2, 3.
From here, the patient will be unpackaged from the Stokes basket and moved to the waiting stretcher, wheeled stretcher, and into the ambulance for transport. For this skill, we're going to use the flexible stretcher. And to use the flexible stretcher, we will do the log roll of the patient and pull the flexible stretcher underneath the patient and then package the patient into the flexible stretcher. move the patient while they're on the flexible stretcher onto the wheeled stretcher for transport. So Matt and Joe are going to log roll the patient.
You ready, Matt?
Once again, using good lifting techniques, watching the safety of their back, and also making sure they're being safe for the patient.
3.
They've got good communication. They've kept their device nice and close. From this point, they'll log roll the patient back.
Back on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
And then they'll load the patient into the flexible stretcher. From this point, we'll have 4 providers that will come in and actually help to lift this patient and assist Matt and Joe in getting the patient onto the wheeled stretcher. John? We use good lifting techniques using our legs and not our backs.
Okay, up on 3. 1, 2, 3. And then move over to the gurney.
And then from this point, we will secure the patient to the stretcher, to the wheeled stretcher, so that the wheeled stretcher may be moved into the ambulance and the patient may be transported. And now we're going to take the patient on the stair chair and move him to the awaiting wheeled stretcher. Bring him back, Joe. Good. So Joe's just going to wheel the patient on the stretcher or on the stair chair. We're going to move him over to the wheeled stretcher that is waiting. And for this scenario, our patient is able to stand on his own. He was having difficulty moving down the stairs, and we wanted to assist that process. So we'll help the patient stand. And then we'll move the patient to the awaiting wheeled stretcher. From this point, we'll secure the patient to the wheeled stretcher. I got you. Once the patient is secured to the wheeled stretcher, we can move the stretcher into the awaiting ambulance. At this time, we're going to move the patient who has already been secured to the portable stretcher and move that patient to the awaiting wheeled stretcher. So Joe and I are going to use proper lifting techniques, and Joe will call the commands and we'll communicate together and move the patient.
Are you ready? Lift on 3. 1, 2, 3.
At this time, we'll go ahead and secure the patient while he's on the portable stretcher to the wheeled stretcher. At this point, we'd just like to conclude our lifting and moving techniques instruction.